Okay, good morning. I've got the time as 10:30, so I think we can start. Just before I proceed, I just want to check whether I'm fully audible and whether you can actually see my screen for sharing, please. So maybe if you can just drop there in the Q&A section, whether you can hear me properly, as well as whether you can currently see my screen. And then I can proceed with the presentation for this morning, please. Okay, so just drop a thumbs up or a yes in the Q&A section as to whether you can properly hear me and whether you can actually view my screen at the current moment, please. Okay, I've got a confirmation that you can hear and see. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. So that means I can go ahead with the presentation. So let me just go then and share my full presentation with you. Okay, there we go. So once again, warm welcome to our next online session for FAC 2601, Financial Accounting for Companies. My name is Frank Montgomery. I'm one of the lecturers, and I will be responsible for presenting this session this morning regarding our next online class number 9. Okay, the house rules as per normal. The session is recorded. I will do the full presentation, and then at the end, you are more than welcome to ask any questions through the Q&A section, as I've said at the end of the session. So as we go through the session, make notes on anything you would like to ask, and then I will attend to all those at the end of the session. And again, once again, the session will be made available on MyUnisa on our Moodle site. So the full recording will be uploaded and made available so that you can go back and view, and also obviously to the benefit of those that can't attend the session this morning. By now, you should be familiar with the lecturers for this module, Mr. Baloy and Mr. Isley, who have also been presenting some of these sessions and who will still present some of these sessions. Our contact details, as we've indicated previously, the best way to get in touch with us is through our module mailbox, fac261@unisa.ac.za, as there's always one of us attending to those emails, and we try to get back within a 24-hour period. You've also got the message function on Moodle, where you can send a personal message to each of us. And there's also then the option of the discussion forum, where you can post any questions, queries, or issues that you might have, or just join in on a current discussion that is going on a specific topic, whether it be with relating to what we're discussing this morning or anything else in particular regarding the study material that has already been that you've already worked through and have got any issues on. So then, getting to the content of today's lecture, I'll be looking at revenue specifically, which is our next lesson 2. Again, I'll be looking at the applicable accounting standard. I will go through firstly the theory and then look at the application through a few practical examples. As I've said then, lesson tool number 9 deals specifically with revenue, and that will be the content of the lecture today, to run through the standard regarding revenue, looking at theory and the application through some practical examples. Right, so let's get cracking on revenue. So the accounting standard applicable to revenue is IFRS 15. So this is a specific standard that looks at revenue basically looking at and describing and defining what is revenue, and then obviously going over to how we should recognize revenue, and then obviously finally disclose revenue in a set of financial statements. So what we are looking at in IFRS 15 is revenue from contracts with customers is to report useful information about the nature of the revenue. So what does this revenue consist of? Obviously important in able to disclose it, the amount of the revenue. Apologize for that. The amount of the revenue, the timing of the revenue. In other words, IFRS 15 will provide us with information of when should revenue be recognized, the exact timing involved in recognizing revenue, as well as dealing with uncertainty of revenue and cash flows. So if there's any uncertainty and there is future cash flows involved regarding revenue, IFRS 15 will guide us on how to recognize revenue with regards to future cash flows as well. So in short, that is what IFRS 15 and revenue is all about, to determine what is the nature of the revenue, what is the amount of the revenue, the timing of the recognition, and if there's uncertainty with revenue regarding future cash flows, how to deal with that as far as recognizing and disclosing revenue is concerned. So in IFRS 15, they define income based on the conceptual framework of 2018 as any increase in assets or a decrease in liabilities resulting in an increase in equity. So your old standard accounting equation, which you dealt with in school as well as should have covered in your first year. So if there's an increase in assets that results in an increase in equity, or there's a decrease in liability, which will also result in an increase in equity, then it will be referred to as income that should be recognized as revenue, with the only exception obviously being if there's any contribution from your equity participants. So any equity contribution, any capital contribution by the owners will increase equity, okay? But it won't be seen as income because that is direct contribution of capital to the benefit of the institution or the entity itself. It does not arise through an increase in assets or a decrease in liability that can be recognized as income. It is purely a contribution that results in the increase in equity and should not be resolved and covered as income to be recognized as revenue. So the income to be recognized is the income arising through an entity's ordinary activities. So if our ordinary activities is to sell products to customers, that is our normal business activity. Through the selling of the products, obviously we are generating an income, and that is the income that should be recognized as revenue. Where will it be disclosed? By now you would have seen it is the first line item on the statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income. So every statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income starts off with the first line item referred to as revenue, and next to it there will be an amount disclosed, being the total income to be recognized in a specific period resulting from an entity's ordinary business activities. So just a single line item with the total revenue that is recognized by an entity. The standard further determines when and how much revenue should be recognized. So once we've identified that we do have revenue, obviously we need to disclose this revenue, as we said, as a first line item in your statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income. But the question then is, when should it be done and how much should be recognized as our revenue? Now, IFRS 15 provides us with a 5-step revenue model. First up, we need to identify the contract. There needs to be a contract involved that will result in revenue for the entity. Once we've identified the contract, we need to identify the performance obligation within the contract. So that is the second step. So first step, identify the contract that will give rise to revenue. Then within this contract, identify the performance obligation. The third step would be to determine the transaction price, because remember we said we want to know how much revenue should be recognized. So this will be determined by the transaction price as communicated in the contract. There will be a transaction price. Once we've determined the transaction price, we need to allocate this transaction price to the performance obligation. The performance obligation would naturally come from the normal business activities. We are selling something to a third party or to a customer of us. What is the performance obligation? We need to provide the product to the customer in terms of the contract that we engaged in. So once that contract is in place, we've determined what the transaction price will be. All we need to do now is allocate that transaction price to the performance obligation. And the final step is then to recognize the revenue as that first line item in your statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income for a specific period. So basically our 5-step model: identify if there's a contract, identify the performance obligation within this contract that will give rise to revenue. From this, determine what is the transaction price. Then we allocate this transaction price to the performance obligation. And finally, the 5th and final step is to recognize the revenue. Now, first, to determine all of these, we need to deal with a few definitions, because we've seen now in the 5-step model, there's reference to contract, there's reference to transaction price, there's reference to performance obligations. So IFRS 15 provides us with a list of definitions so that one can determine when do we have a contract, when do we have performance obligation, what is a transaction price. So it defines a contract as agreement between two, obviously at least, or more parties, which creates enforceable rights and obligations. So there needs to be by law enforcement that can take place so that you fulfill your requirements within the contract. So the normal contract, if we sell a product, would be we enter into a contract with a customer. Within that contract, we need to provide a product, they need to pay for that product. So within that contract, there's enforceable rights and obligations. The enforceable right for us to deliver the product to the client, and his obligation is to settle the bill for that product delivered. A contract asset is an entity's right to consideration in exchange for goods or services. So as we've explained above, the contract is the agreement. Within that contract, it gives rise to a contract asset because we will receive consideration, payment, in exchange for the good, the product that we provide, or if we are a service provider, for the service that we provided, which the entity has transferred to a customer. So we need to transfer to a customer this product that we are providing or the service that we are providing at a specific point in time. In return, we will receive a consideration. On the flip side, a contract liability is when the entity has obligation to transfer to a customer goods or services for which the entity has received consideration. So if we've already received the consideration of the payment, there's a liability towards us to pay for those products that we have received. So if we purchase something on credit, again, there's a contract in place. The party that we engage with will now provide a service or goods to us. In return, we need to pay a consideration for these goods or services. So therefore, there's a liability that comes directly from the contract agreement that we have entered into. What is a customer? A customer is a party that has contracted with an entity to obtain goods or services. that are an output of the entity's ordinary activities in exchange for consideration. So still the same principle that applies if the customer comes to us, he wants to buy a specific product from us. We enter into a contract and agreement whereby we will provide him with this good or service. So that is our output. In exchange, we will receive the consideration, the payment from the customer. Once we receive this payment from the customer, there's income involved, which will increase our economic benefits during the accounting period in the form of inflows or enhancements or increase in the value of assets or decrease of liabilities. That will result in an increase in equity, and as we've already explained, other than those relating to contributions from equity participants. So once you've sold something to the customer, if he pays cash, we receive the economic benefit. It will result to an inflow. We receive the money, and the value of our asset, cash or bank, will increase with the amount that we received. If we sold it on credit, we will create a financial debtor for us. We will receive the economic benefits in future. But already once the customer has engaged in the contract, it is enforceable by law. So therefore, we already created a debtor for the future cash flows. There will be a future inflow. So our assets has already increased by creating a debtor for us. And once you receive that payment in future, that is just when the inflow of cash will be considered and be recorded. A performance obligation is a promise within a contract with the customer to transfer either a good or a service. So that is our performance obligation, as we've said. Once you entered into the contract, there's an agreement that we will provide something to the customer, whether it be a product or a service. So that is our performance obligation, which is enforceable by law within the contract that we entered into. Based on that, we still need to provide that good or a service that is distinct, or it can be a bundle of goods or services that are distinct and substantially the same, that have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. So it needs to be a distinct product. For example, we are selling a specific product to a customer. Say, for example, we are in an industry and we are selling tires for motor vehicles. The distinct product is the tires, the different types of tires that we provide to the customer. You enter into a contract with the customer to provide them with tires. So that is the good. It is distinct, and we've got a performance obligation once the customer has entered into the agreement and made the payment to provide the goods to him. And that is our performance obligation to the customer within the contract, which will result in income for the entity. The revenue, as we've said, is the specific income arising in the course of the entity's ordinary activities. As we've said, if your ordinary activities involve selling of products to the customer, depending on the performance obligations and when everything falls into place, we will receive the income either in the form of cash or in the future when we've created a debtor. Once you receive that income, it is then recognized as revenue. We also said we need to determine how much revenue to be recognized. That is determined by the standalone selling price of the good or service. Is the price at which an entity would sell a promised good or service separately to a customer. So once again, if you are selling tires, there is a standalone selling price per tire, which can be determined. That is your price that you charge for each and every tire that you are selling to a specific customer, depending on the size, obviously, of the tire and the manufacturer of that tire itself, the brand of the tire. But you can determine a standalone selling price for each of those tires. And based on that, that is what we promise to provide to a customer. The transaction price, which is basically this standalone selling price of the tire, is the amount of consideration to which an entity expects to be entitled in exchange when we transfer the promised good or service to the customer. But remember to exclude any amounts collected on the behalf of third parties such as VAT. So we can only recognize the income that is due to the entity itself, because remember with VAT you have to pay it over to SARS. So the transaction price will be the standalone selling price of each tire that we can recognize as income. So once we've transferred this promised good, the tires, we will receive the payment, the income, and that we can recognize as revenue for the entity. IFRS 15 then goes further to provide us with more information regarding a contract. So a contract is agreement between at least two or even more parties that creates legally enforceable rights and obligations. Okay, we've already identified that there needs to be a contract in place, and thereby you are then enforced or can be enforced by law to comply with the agreement and the arrangements within that specific contract. Now, these contracts can be written or in an oral format, or it can be implied by an entity's customary business practices. But a contract does not exist if each party to the contract has the unilateral enforceable right to terminate a wholly unperformed contract without compensating the other party. So, if there is an agreement between two parties, but both parties have the right to terminate a contract that has not been performed without any compensation involved, then there is no contract. What is considered as an underperformed contract or agreement? It is when the entity has not yet transferred any promised goods or service to the customer. So there was an agreement entered into, but due to unforeseen circumstances, we have not yet been able to produce and transfer the product to a customer. Based on that, we and they decide that this contract won't be honored. So thereby it is terminated without any compensation. Then there was no contract in place. Or if the entity has not yet received and is not yet entitled to receive any consideration in exchange for the promised goods or services. So here we might have delivered the goods already, but we are not receiving any payment. And based on that, we decide to cancel the agreement. Products are returned to us, and it means a contract did not exist if there's no enforceable right, or if we have the right to terminate without compensating the other party. So no compensation has taken place. In that case, the agreement between the two parties won't be seen as a contract. So in both instances, underperformance would be seen if we have not yet been able to transfer or if we've not yet received the payment. And it is our enforceable right to terminate without compensation. Then there was never a contract in place, and obviously you won't have go through the 5-step module to determine any revenue recognition. You will also find in IFRS 15 that we have created or recognized, for example, an existing contract that then requires a modification at a later stage. Any contract modifications should be seen as a separate contract if both of the following conditions are present. The scope of the contract increases because of the addition of promised goods or services that are distinct, as well as the price of the contract increases by an amount of consideration that reflects the entity's standalone selling prices of the additional promised goods or services, and any appropriate adjustments to that price to reflect the circumstances of the particular contract. So here we might have sold 100 items, 100 of our products to a customer. So if all conditions were met, we would recognize initially a contract, and we will recognize revenue based on those 100 products. Now the customer comes back and he wants another 50 added to the original contract. This will be then seen as a contract modification, and we need a separate contract to be recognized, because now the scope of the contract increases because there's an addition of 50 more goods that we promised. The price of the contract will obviously increase because the 50 items will have their own standalone selling price and transaction price, which needs to be added to the original contract. So this modification then is treated as a separate contract based on the fact that both of these conditions are met in such a situation and scenario. What is a performance obligation? The next step, as we've said, we first needed to identify a contract. We've gone through what is deemed to be a contract. What is a performance obligation? This is determined at the inception of the contract by assessing the goods or services promised in a contract with a customer and identifying as a performance obligation each promise to transfer to the customer, which is either a good or service, or a bundle of goods or services that is distinct. So again, if you are selling a specific product, your performance obligation, once you've entered into a contract, is to supply the customer with those goods, depending on the number of units that he requires. They need to be distinct. So again, if you are manufacturing and selling tires, that is your distinct product that you can identify physically and see the tires that you are selling. Or it needs to be a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same and they have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. So the same principle applies there. If you are selling more than the one tire or more than a few tires, these are distinct goods that are substantially the same and have the same pattern of transfer to the customer. Based on that, we have a performance obligation to provide then this service or the goods or a series of distinct goods or services that are substantially the same. And this will be based on your business activities. What is specifically the products that you are providing and making available to the customer? And based on that, at contract of inception, it will determine what is your performance obligation, specifically by providing a good or services or a series of distinct goods or services that will be provided to a customer as determined by the agreement entered into in your contract. So a good or service that is promised to a customer can be considered distinct if both of the following are met. The customer can benefit from the good or service, either on their own or together with other resources that are readily available to the customer. Okay, if we use our same example, if we are selling tires, the customer can obviously benefit from the goods that we are providing because they are replacing old and outdated tires with a new product. If it is a service that we are delivering, say, for example, we are offering a repairs and maintenance service, it is distinct because it is specific service that we deliver, and the benefit for the customer is improvement in their existing items that are maintained or serviced by us. Secondly, the entity promised to transfer the good or service to the customer is separately identifiable from other promises in a contract. So the promise that we have here is separately identifiable from other promises in the contract. So it might be in some instances that there is more than one performance obligation within one contract. If we are a dealer in vehicles, for example, We sell a vehicle. Attached to that vehicle will be a service or maintenance plan, which in some instances are included within the package, or it can be excluded. The issue is that both these are separate performance obligations. The vehicle can be seen separately, obviously the actual vehicle. The service and maintenance plan can also be seen as a separate obligation. Even though it goes with the vehicle, we can still sell the service and maintenance plan separately from the vehicle. So the customer can still decide to add on an addition, an extension of the service or maintenance plan. So it means we've got two performance obligations within the same contract that are separately identifiable. One is the car itself, the vehicle. The other, on the other hand, is the maintenance or service plan. And both of those are performance obligations that are distinct, from which the customer can benefit, and obviously as well, by having a new vehicle and ensure that it is maintained and keep its value and provide happy miles on the road. There is a service and maintenance plan that is identified separately as our performance obligation within the one contract that we entered into. So, depending on the contract, the promised goods or services may include, but are not limited, the sales of goods produced by an entity, for example, inventory of a manufacturer. That inventory is our performance obligation that we will provide to the customer. The resale of goods purchased by an entity. If we purchase goods to resell them, the merchandise will be our performance obligation that we need to comply with. The resale of rights to goods or services purchased by an entity. If we acting as a principal, if we're an entity acting as a principal, it's a ticket that we resold on behalf of a third party. If we are performing a contractually agreed upon task or task for a customer, that is our performance obligation with the contract. We need to perform with regards to the contract these agreed upon tasks for a customer. If we are providing a service of being ready to provide goods or services, for example, unspecified updates to software that are provided on a when and if available basis, or of making goods or services available to a customer for use as and when the customer decides. So there we provided, or we sold a computer to the client, and we can provide him with updates to the software when and if it is required. It is again a performance obligation determined through the service that we provide by providing the software updates in addition to the original product that we sold to the customer. If we are providing a service of arranging for another party to transfer goods or services to a customer, acting as an agent of another party. So that would be the transport, to transfer the goods to a customer. That is our performance obligation. The granting of rights to goods or services to be provided in the future, which a customer can resell or provide to each customer. So this is where an entity is selling a product to a retailer, promises to transfer an additional good or service to an individual who purchases the product from the retailer again. So that will be our performance obligation to be the third party in such a transaction. If we're involved in the construction or manufacturing or developing of an asset on behalf of the customer. So he has tasked us of manufacturing and developing a specific asset. That is our performance obligation that we need to comply with. Granting licenses and granting options to purchase additional goods or services with providing a customer with material rights. So the granting of the licenses there will be our performance obligation, and we need to comply and ensure the upholding of the license that we provided to the customer through such a contract or transaction. The third component is our transaction price in our revenue module. This is the amount of consideration which an entity expects to be entitled to in terms of the contract and obviously our customary business activities in exchange for transferring the goods or services to the customer, excluding, as we've said, any amounts collected on behalf of third parties in the form of VAT. Now, this consideration promised in a contract with a customer may include fixed amounts, variable amounts, or both of these. So that is where it's then important to determine what is the actual transaction price, if it is variable or fixed, so that we can determine the amount that needs to be recognized. Now, the nature, timing, and amount of consideration promised by a customer will affect the estimate of the transaction price, and the entity will need to consider the effects of all of the following. So it is crucially important in terms of IFRS 15 revenue to determine the exact and correct amount that needs to be recorded and recognized. In exchange, then obviously within the contract of the promised good or services. Now, what we need to consider regarding the nature, timing, and amount are the following. If the consideration promised includes a variable amount, the entity will estimate and update the estimate at the end of each reporting period, the amount of consideration to which the entity will be entitled to in exchange for transferring the promised goods or services. Now, a variable amount can vary due to various reasons. For example, there can be discount involved. There can be rebates involved. There can be refunds involved, credits given, price concessions, incentives, performance bonuses or penalties are all items that needs to be considered in determining an estimate of the transaction price. So you won't only look at the standalone selling price, but you need to update on a regular basis, as we said, at the end of each reporting period, this transaction price for any discounts that are involved in the transaction or the contract, any rebates, refunds, credits, whatever was included as part of the contract agreement between the two parties. And therefore, the transaction price in such an instance could be a variable amount, an amount that changes and needs to be updated and estimated on a regular yearly basis to take into consideration the effect of any of these items that are mentioned here. We also need to adjust a promised amount for the transaction for the effect of time value of money. Meaning, if we sell a product to a customer, but he won't settle it immediately, we give him 30 days or 60 days for settlement. Then we need to adjust for the time value of money, the actual amount that we regarded as the transaction price. So here we will provide the customer or entity with a significant benefit of financing the transfer of goods or services to the customer, meaning that he doesn't have to pay immediately, so he can still go and sort out his finances in order to settle the outstanding amount at a later stage. But for us, we need to determine what is the transaction price and what the revenue will be recognized when we enter the contract. And that is where we need to take consideration the effects of time, value of money, with the objective of the adjustment being for an entity to recognize revenue at the amount that reflects the price that the customer would have paid for the promised goods or services if the customer had paid cash for those goods or services when they transfer the goods to the customer. So if we sell something to a customer today, there will be a certain price and cash value attached to that product. If the payment is unreceived in 1 month or 2 months' time, that cash value will differ due purely to the time value of money over a period of 1 or 2 months. And that is why IFRS 15 stipulates then that needs to be considered in determining the transaction price for such a transaction where there's a delay in the transfer of cash inflows. You can't purely go and recognize the cash selling price, it needs to be adjusted for the time value of money and therefore recognize revenue accordingly in accordance with the time value of money principle. So an entity will consider all relevant facts and circumstances in assessing whether a contract contains a significant financing component, including both of the following. If there is a difference, if any, between the amount of promised consideration and the cash selling price of the promised goods or services, because then it represents a significant financing component. If there is a significant difference between the promised consideration and the actual cash selling price. So here we're looking at the cash selling price of date of transaction and compare it with the promised consideration to be paid by the customer, as well as the combined effect of the following. The expected length of time between transferring the promised goods or service to the customer and when payment is received, and the prevailing interest rates in the relevant market. So in essence, what we need to consider, as we've said on the previous slide, is the actual time value of money. By bringing in the time value of money, looking at the length of time between the delivery of the products and when payment is received, looking at the prevailing interest rates during this period to determine if there's a significant finance component involved, to see if there is a huge or a big difference between the promised consideration and the cash selling price. Because that needs to be taken in consideration when calculating the revenue, as well as when and how much revenue to be recognized during this period of time. And we will go through a practical example where I will show you how we deal with a situation like this. The transaction price for contracts in which a customer promises consideration in a form other than cash, so if there's not going to be a cash payment, will be measured at the fair value of the non-cash consideration. So in return for a good or service that we deliver, they will provide us with a good or service other than cash. So that is our non-cash consideration. To determine the transaction price, we will have to determine what is the fair value of this consideration that they provide to us. If you cannot reasonably estimate the fair value of the non-cash consideration, we need to have a reference to the standalone selling price of the good or services promises in exchange for consideration. So if we've sold something to a product to an entity, they promise to provide us with a service, not for free, but a service in return to pay for the product. So the service that they provide, we won't pay for, so it is a non-cash consideration that we receive. But then if you can't determine the fair value, we need to look at what is the standalone selling price of such a service that they normally offer to all their other customers. And that specific service fee that they then offer will be regarded as the transaction price of the non-cash consideration that is provided in such a transaction. Okay, the fourth step in our revenue module is the allocation of the transaction price. So the standalone selling price of a distinct good or service underlying each performance obligation in the contract is determined at contract inception, and that transaction price is allocated in proportion to those standalone selling prices. So as we've already identified, the standalone selling price is a price at which an entity would sell promised good or service separately to a customer. So that is basically when you walk into a Checkers or a Pick n Pay, the standalone selling price, if you buy a jar of coffee, is the transaction price because it is advertised at a specific price. That is your transaction price allocated to the transaction for which you will recognize income and finally recognize revenue. Remember, we said that at contract inception within the same contract, there can be different or separate performance obligations. We take again the example, if you sell a vehicle and attached to the vehicle is a service or maintenance plan. Each of these two products are distinct, the vehicle on the one side and the maintenance plan on the other side. Both of these items will have a separate standalone selling price. So you can sell the vehicle at a specific value and you can sell a maintenance plan at a value. And both those will have a fixed transaction price. So those transaction price of these separate items will then be allocated to the two separate performance obligations. If it is not possible to determine what the actual standalone selling price of an item is, it needs to be estimated by considering all information such as market conditions, entity-specific factors, and information about the customer or class of customer that is reasonably available to the entity. This will obviously be quite the exception with regards to revenue recognition, because normally there should always be a transaction price that is identifiable based on the standalone selling price of a specific item, which will allocate to the performance obligations. So in unique situations, it might be the case that such a standalone selling price is not available. Therefore, we can't determine transaction price, and then we'll have to take consideration other factors to determine what the transaction price will be at what the revenue is going to be recognized. If a customer receives a discount for purchasing a bundle of goods or services, if the sum of the standalone selling prices of those goods or services promised in the contract exceeds the promised consideration in the contract. So that is if the selling price or the standalone selling price is more than the actual payment that is received, there will obviously be a discount involved. So if you're selling a product and the normal selling price is 50 Rand, but now you are selling it at a special promotion for 40 Rand, the difference between the transaction price, the standalone selling price of 50 Rand, and the consideration received of 40 Rand will be a discount. How to allocate the discount part to the transaction price? So in this instance, an entity will allocate a discount proportionally to all performance obligations in the contract. In other words, the discount will go to the separate performance obligations if you do have separate performance obligations. The proportionate allocation of a discount in these circumstances is a result of the entity allocating the transaction price to each performance obligation on the basis of the relative standalone selling prices of the underlying distinct goods and services. Okay, so in the example where we sold a jar of coffee, the discount will be allocated directly just to the jar of coffee because that is the only performance obligation that we had. If, however, the discount applies to the selling of the vehicle with a maintenance plan attached to it, that discount, if any, is allocated on the transaction, needs to be allocated proportionally to the vehicle and the maintenance plan, based on the transaction price or the standalone selling price of each component. So there you will look at what is the standalone selling price of the vehicle, what is the standalone selling price of the maintenance plan, and then appropriate the discount separately to these two performance obligations. If there's only one performance obligation, as we've said, obviously, it will be allocated straightforward only to that specific performance obligation. Similarly, a variable consideration that is promised in a contract may be attributable to the entire contract or to a specific part of the contract. So we might have a situation that one or more, but not all performance obligations in a contract. For example, a bonus may be contingent on an entity transferring a promised good or service within a specified period. So that bonus is definitely dependent on whether we can provide a good or service and comply with the performance obligation. Then it will have to be allocated as part of the transaction price. If you have a situation of one or more, but not all distinct goods or services promised in a series of distinct goods or services that form part of a single performance obligation. So there we have the situation, if the consideration promised for the second year of a 2-year cleaning service contract will increase purely based on inflation, then it needs to be allocated to the transaction price for the same performance obligation. So the performance obligation that we had was a service contract for 2 years. All that has changed is that the transaction price will increase in the second year of the agreement due to inflation. So this will be attributable to the entire contract. This was a contract. So it won't be a specific part of the contract. It will be based on the entire contract that we need to allocate the variable consideration to determine the full transaction price. However, if your performance obligation is dependent on one specific item regarding the bonus, then only that specific part of the contract needs to be and should be allocated to the transaction price of the agreement that is entered into. So the same applies as with the previous one, the previous slide that we had here. With the allocation of a transaction price, whether it be now a discount or a variable consideration, it can be attributable and allocated to the transaction price in total, or only to a specific part of the specific contract component. After your contract inception, your transaction price may change for various reasons. An entity will allocate to a performance obligation in a contract any subsequent changes in the transaction price on the same basis as at contract inception. So we don't reallocate the transaction price to reflect changes in standalone selling prices after contract inception. Amounts allocated to a satisfied performance obligation are recognized as revenue or as a reduction of revenue in the period which the transaction price changes. So here we've got an existing contract, as we've had now with the previous one, where we've got a contract, for example, to provide cleaning services. The performance obligation is to provide the cleaning service in a first and a second year. The transaction price will change in the second year due to inflation. So it's not necessary to reallocate the transaction price to reflect the changes in the standalone selling price after the contract inception, because that was known right from the outset. Therefore, it will be allocated in total to the same contract as part of the contraction or the transaction price. And it will basically just increase the revenue. The reduction of revenue will be where there's any, for example, discount, rebates, or refunds with regards to the original contract that we entered into. This will result in a reduction of revenue and as such, a change in the transaction price. So it's not necessary to reallocate the transaction price. These amounts allocated to already satisfied performance obligation are then just recognized as additional revenue or as a reduction in the revenue in the period in which the transaction price changed, whatever the reason for that be, an increase or a decrease in the original transaction price that we recognized at inception of the contract itself. The next step and the final step in the revenue recognition is to recognize the revenue when or as the entity satisfies a performance obligation. And that is normally done when we transfer a promised good or service to a customer. Now, when is the transfer completed? That is when the customer obtains control of that asset. So for each performance obligation identified, an entity determines at contract inception whether it satisfied the performance obligation over time or at a point in time. If it's not satisfied over time, the performance obligation is obviously satisfied at a point in time. So these are the two issues at stake when recognizing or the satisfaction of a performance obligation. It can be at a specific point in time, or it can be over a period of time. Goods and services are assets, even if only momentarily, when they are received and used. Control of an asset refers to the ability to direct the use of and obtain substantially all of the remaining benefits from the asset. So control includes the ability to prevent other entities from directing the use of and obtaining the benefits from an asset. The benefits of an asset are potential cash flows that can be obtained directly or indirectly. So we need to determine when is a performance obligation satisfied. That is, as we've said, when the transfer has gone to the customer and that customer now has the control of the asset. The control is determined whether they are using the asset to produce goods or services, including public services. If they are able to use that asset now to produce goods or services on their side. If they are using the asset to enhance the value of their assets, it means they've got control over the asset itself. If they are using that asset to settle liabilities or reduce expenses, if they are selling or exchanging that asset or entitled to do so, if they are able to pledge the asset to secure a loan, it means they've got control of the full asset, and we have therefore satisfied our performance obligation by transferring the asset to them. An entity transfers control of a good or service over time and therefore satisfies a performance obligation and recognize revenue over time if one of the following is met. Remember, we said we can recognize it at a point in time or over time. So when is it considered that the transfer has taken place over time? This is when the entity simultaneously receives and consumes the benefits provided by the entity's performance as the entity performs. The entity's performance creates or enhances an asset. It's a work in progress that the customer controls as the asset is created or enhanced. Or the entity's performance does not create an asset with alternative use to the entity, and the entity has enforceable right for payment for performance completed to date. So this is a situation where we entered into a contract where we still need to manufacture, for example, a specific product. So as we go through the stages of producing a final product, there will be an issue relating to revenue recognized over a period of time, because at certain stages of completion, we will be entitled to receive income, which will increase our revenue. So based on the performance that we provide over time, will determine at what stages we should recognize revenue and how much revenue should be recognized at those satisfaction of your performance obligations. So once again, go back to the contract, determine what are our performance obligations. If it is to be provide the service over a period of time, we need to determine when in this process and over time are we satisfying our performance obligations in order to establish and determine the recognition of revenue in terms of IFRS 15. If a performance obligation is not satisfied over time, it is obviously satisfied at a point in time. So here you can determine at a specific point in time when we have satisfied our performance obligation. Again, this is to determine at what point in time does the customer obtain control of a promised asset, meaning we have satisfied our performance obligation. So we will consider requirements for control. There needs to be control over the asset by the third party or the customer. And the indicators of the transfer of control can include the entity has a present right for payment for the asset. So we've delivered the asset, now we're entitled to payment. The customer has a legal title to the asset. So in terms of the contract that they enter to, they are legally entitled and that can be enforced by law that they are now the legal owner of the asset. When we have transferred the physical possession of the asset, so the asset has been transferred and delivered to the customer. The customer has the significant risk and reward of ownership of the asset. So this specific asset can't be sold to anybody else. It belongs specifically to the customer, and they are now the owner of the significant risk and rewards. The customer has accepted the asset. So there we have provided them with the asset. They have signed and accepted that they have received and are now the owners of the asset. And those would be at a specific point in time when you have satisfied your performance obligation, if any of these are relevant and applicable. Okay, and that covers the theory part with regards to revenue recognition, the 5-step model that we need to go through, and all that is attached within each of those sections of the 5-step module. First of all, to determine what is a contract. Then we need to determine the performance obligation or obligations within a contract. Then we need to determine the transaction price with regards to the standalone selling price of a specific performance obligation. Then we need to allocate that transaction price to the performance obligations. And finally, we will need to recognize the revenue associated with the contract. So let's look at a few practical examples. On 1st of March, Lipton, which is a tea and coffee manufacturer, sells a coffee machine for 150,000 to a customer on credit, on the condition that the amount must be settled on 28 February 2020. So as you can see, it's only 2 years later. The financing component is significant, and Lipton Limited's incremental borrowing rate is 9% per annum, while the customer's credit risk is 15% per annum. Now we need to provide the journal entries for all the relevant years involved. So again, here we need to determine, with regards to recognition of revenue, what is the transaction price? And due to the fact that the transaction price or the transaction will run over a couple of years, need to consider the current cash value compared to the time value of money involved over the 3-year period. So the financing component is considered to be significant. We base the calculation using the customer's credit risk. Now, through the use of your financial calculator, you can determine the present value, the time value currently. In other words, determining what is the cash value of this machine that we sold in 2 years' time when we receive the actual payment in total. So your years is 2, that is N2. Interest rate applicable is 15%. There's no payment in the 2 years because the full amount is settled at year 2. The future value is a payment to be made, 150,000. Calculate present value, which will give us a value of 113.41. So this is a present value, the cash value that we will receive in 2 years' time, set in today's terms. So the finance component to be recognized over 2 years will be the difference between the cash selling price now of 150,000 and the present value that we'll receive in 2 years' time of 113.41. So there is a finance component of 36,578 involved in this transaction. So meaning, on the date of the transaction, we will recognize the current revenue in the current cash value of that by creating a debtor trade receivables for the present value of 113,421. We will recognize total revenue of 113,521. So this is the revenue that we can recognize on the date of the transaction, due to the fact that the settlement will only take place in 2 years' time. So it's basically recognizing the total of 150,000 over the 2-year period, because at the end of the first year, we will recognize the finance component for 1 year, which will be the 15% on the outstanding amount of 113.41 recognized as revenue, which comes to 17,000. This will be added to trade receivables, and we will recognize a finance income of 17,013 at the end of the first year. The same at the end of the second year, amount due now is the 113 originally recognized, plus the 17,000 interest of the first year. So now the interest component will be 15%. So we add 19,565 to trade receivables. We recognize finance income at the end of the second year of 19,565. And then as the settlement takes place at the end of the second year, our asset bank increases by receiving the 150 due, and we eliminate trade receivables in total of 115,000 from the accounting records. So if you add up all the trade receivables amount, this 113,421 plus the 17,013 plus the 19,565, it should give us the 150,000. So all that we've done here is to recognize the impact of time value of money in the recognition of revenue, in that we can only recognize on the date of the transaction the actual time value of revenue worth 113, and then recognize the cash flow over the 2-year period until the settlement takes place by recognizing finance income at the end of the first year, finance income at the end of the second year, and then we have the full settlement that takes place at the end of the second year. Okay, our second example. Bugatti enters into an agreement with Mike for the sale of their latest SUV, along with a 4-year service plan for a total amount of 900,000 Rand. Any client may also acquire the exact same vehicle without the service plan at a standalone selling price of 860,000. Bugatti regularly sells this 4-year service plan to the customer at a standalone selling price of 60,000. So this was a combination of the two, but you can both buy them separately at 860 and 60,000 respectively. The sale took place on 1 March 2018. Okay, discuss and journalize above transactions in the accounting records of Bugatti for the years ending February 2019 and 20 respectively. So Bugatti is required to deliver a vehicle and a service plan. So there's a single contract for both items. They are negotiated as a package with a single commercial objective. The performance obligations are goods or services that are distinct. So the goods that are distinct in this transaction is the vehicle and the service plan. They are separately identifiable. They are not interrelated and dependent on each other due to the fact that they can be sold separately. Therefore, we have got both two distinct obligations, which we need to account for separately for revenue. We allocate the total consideration based on the best estimate standalone selling price for each of the components, because remember, we do have a standalone price for each of them being 860 and 60,000. So we've got a single contract with two performance obligations. First, we need to provide the vehicle to the customer, and then over a 4-year period, he will be able to bring the car in for a service based on the service plan. So we need to deliver the vehicle and the service plan over the 4 years. A single contract negotiated as a package. We've got distinct products, and we need to recognize then these two performance obligations. So how do we recognize revenue based on this? The Bugatti has got a selling price of 860. That is its standalone selling price. The service plan has got a standalone selling price of 60,000. So in total, a value of 920,000. In appropriating the revenue, we look at the ratio between the car and the service plan. So the selling price of 860 over the total value of 920,000 represents 93.48% of the total transaction value. The service plan of 60,000 over 920,000 represents 6.52% of the total transaction price. Based on this ratio, we allocate the total transaction price of 900,000 Rand. So therefore, an allocation of 841 to the car and 58,000 to the service plan. Remember, the 900,000 was the combined price for the transaction for Mike. All we're allocating now is a different performance obligations based on the ratio of each contributing. Therefore, on 1 March, we will debit bank or create a debtor for the total 900,000. We will recognize a revenue of 841,320 for the vehicle. The 58,680 is regarded as income that we received in advance, because remember, we still need to satisfy this obligation in 4 years' time. The cost of sales is just the 75%. Remember, we had a 25% markup. So based on the total sale that is recognized of 900,000, we'll have cost of sales of 675, and then obviously it goes out of our inventory because we sold the vehicle now. And then for the subsequent 4 years, as the service plan is utilized, now income received in advance will be recognized as revenue for each year by taking the total income of 58,680 for the service plan divided over 4 years. So in each year, we will recognize revenue of 14,670. Okay, so for 2020, the same, 14,670, and that will be basically the total income that we will recognize over the 4-year period. So we start off recognizing the total transaction price, the standalone selling price for the total package. To revenue goes the vehicle because that is immediately delivered. We recognize income received in advance for the service plan, and then over the 4 years, we will recognize the service plan income as revenue in the financial records. Okay, and the final example that I want to discuss with you, we've got Hilo Limited, which is a software developer, entering into a contract with Flow Limited to transfer a software license, perform an installation service, and provide unspecified software updates and technical, which is online and telephonic support for a 2-year period. So Hilo sells the license, installation service, and technical support separately. The installation service includes changing the web screen for each type of user, for example, for marketing, inventory management, and information technology. The installation service is routinely performed by other entities, and it does not significantly modify the software. So the software remains functional without the updates and technical support. So we need to discuss whether the goods or services promises in the contract by Hilo to Flow are distinct, first of all, and then clearly indicate the performance obligations you can identify in this contract based on the distinct promise discussion. So Hilo assesses the goods and services promised to Flow to determine which goods and services are distinct. Hilo observes that the software is delivered before the other goods and services, and it remains functional without the updates and technical support, meaning Flow can benefit from the updates together with the software license transferred right at the start of the contract. Therefore, Hilo will conclude that Flow Limited can benefit from each of the goods and services either on their own or together with the other goods and services that are readily available. So, Hilo will also consider the factors in IFRS 15 and determines that the promise to transfer each good and service to Flow Limited is separately identifiable from each of the other promises. So, although it integrates the software into the customer system, the installation service does not significantly modify or customize the software itself, and as such, the software and installation services do not significantly affect Flow's ability to use and benefit from the software license, because this installation services are routine and can be obtained from alternative providers. None of the promised goods or services significantly modify or customize one another, nor are we providing a significant service of integrating the software and services into a combined output. So we can conclude that the software and services do not significantly affect each other, and thus are not highly independent or highly interrelated. Because Hilo would still be able to fulfill its promise to transfer the initial software license independently from its promise to subsequently provide the installation service, software updates, as well as technical support. So what this means is, based on the above, we can identify 4 separate performance obligations in the contract. The obligation is to provide the software license, an obligation to provide the installation service, an obligation to provide software updates, and finally, technical support. So 4 separate identifiable performance obligations, and based on the satisfaction of each of these performance obligations, the revenue will then be allocated to the separate performance obligations based on their independent transaction prices that are allocated to these 4 performance obligations. And that, ladies and gents, is my session for today, discussing revenue. I trust that you were able to follow me the whole way. But yeah, at the end of the discussion, I said I'll open up for any questions. So I'll just close down this the presentation for you, and I'll go to the Q&A section to work with any questions that you might have. Guys, as I've indicated, still a little 10 minutes or so to go in the session, so feel free to post any questions that you might have in the Q&A section, and I will tend to those questions. If there's not any questions, then obviously we can close down the session. But yeah, like I say, still have 10 minutes available, so please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A section, and then we'll have a look and attend to those questions that you might have there. I'm not currently seeing any questions popping up in the Q&A section. Just under 10 minutes still to go, so still time for you to post any question that you might have on today's session. Please feel free to go ahead and just drop it in the Q&A section, and we can discuss those issues that you might have. And just looking to the update for the Q&A section, still no questions in the section at this point in time. Okay, yes, yeah, just looking again, like I said, any questions you might have in the Q&A section. Still a little bit of time left in the session, so feel free to drop them in there, and I will have a look and then try and answer to the best of my ability if you might have any questions on the session this morning. At the current stage, no questions, so maybe an indication that you are happy and that everything was 100% clear, then it's no problem. But yeah, you can still use the time to drop me a question in the Q&A section. Even if it's not related specifically to the session today, I will also have a look and try and answer that to my best of my ability. I'm still not seeing any questions posted in the Q&A section. Let's just give it another minute or two. And if I don't have any questions coming through in that time, I'm going to end off the session for this morning. So last call for any questions that you might have. Feel free to just drop them in the Q&A section. I will gladly have a look at those for you. Okay, it seems like there are no questions. Maybe everyone is tired. It's been a long week. Just want to go to the weekend, have a good rest. Well, as I've said, then if there are any questions that you might have and think afterwards, feel free to get in touch with us. Or if there's something that wasn't 100% clear, feel free to have a relook at the video once it's available again on our module site that you can go to and then satisfy any questions that you do have. But then seeing that there are no questions yet posted in the Q&A section, I'm going to end off the session for this morning. Thank you so much for those of you that made the effort and time to attend to this. We do appreciate that. And then I wish you all a wonderful weekend ahead. Keep warm, keep safe. All the best until we speak again. Goodbye, everyone.